Shall we have a last look at the news headlines for you?
Yeah, President Donald Trump is back at the White House after leaving hospital where he was being treated for coronavirus.
Mr. Trump, who's still taking powerful steroids to fight the virus, told his fellow Americans not to be afraid of COVID-19 or to feel dominated by it.
And I learned so much about coronavirus. And one thing that's for certain, don't let it dominate you. Don't be afraid of it. You're going to beat it. We have the best medical equipment. We have the best medicines, all developed recently. And you're going to beat it. I didn't feel so good. And 2 days ago, I could have left 2 days ago. 2 days ago, I felt great, like better than I have in a long time. I said just recently, better than 20 years ago. I stood out front. I led. Nobody that's a leader would not do what I did. And I know there's a risk, there's a danger, but that's okay.
Well, earlier, the political analyst Eric Ham said Mr. Trump appeared to have some difficulty in breathing while he was posing for pictures at the White House.
Yeah, it was a pretty surprising scene. In fact, it made me actually clutch my chest while watching him, where it seemed like he was really struggling to catch his breath. And you wondered why the president would even put himself in that position to grapple with the virus so publicly when he could have just simply went inside. But again, this is a president who seeks to not only exude and showcase strength, but also this is a president who recognizes where he stands right now with less than 30 days to go until the election. And more than anything,
well, Britain cannot continue to borrow enormous amounts of money in the long term because it's unsustainable for them.
Good morning to you. It's Tuesday, the 6th of October. Our main story for you, President Donald Trump is back at the White House after leaving the hospital where he was being treated for coronavirus.
In a video posted on social media, Mr. Trump said he felt really good and urged Americans not to be afraid of the virus.
And I learned so much about coronavirus. And one thing that's for certain, don't let it dominate you. Don't be afraid of it. You're going to beat it. We have the best medical equipment. We have the best medicines, all developed recently. And you're going to beat it. I didn't feel so good. And 2 days ago, I could have left 2 days ago. 2 days ago, I felt great, like better than I have in a long time. I said just recently, better than 20 years ago. I stood out front. I led. Nobody that's a leader would not do what I did. And I know there's a risk, there's a danger, but that's okay.
Well, let's speak to Eric Ham now, who's a political analyst in Washington, D.C. and a regular on Breakfast. Eric, appreciate you staying up very late to speak to us this morning on Breakfast. You were outside the Walter Reed Medical Center when Mr. Trump was helicoptered back to the White House. Give us an idea of the scene there. What was happening?
it was a pretty surreal scene. You had throngs of Trump supporters out supporting the president, chanting 4 more years, some even chanting 12 more years. There were people out there with their signs. There were people out there letting everyone know that Trump is someone who is turning the country around, someone who is going to defeat the virus. So a pretty raucous crowd, a pretty excited crowd, especially when the president came out of the hospital and boarded Marine One. You just saw a really raucous and really celebratory moment from Trump supporters. And what this speaks to is clearly, even as the president is battling a deadly virus, there's still throng of supporters who care about this president deeply.
Eric, I don't know, I'm sure you've seen the pictures of him on the balcony at the White House, and so many people fascinated by watching these pictures this morning, both here in the UK, I'm sure in America as well, because here you've got you know, a man who's taken his mask off, which he's been criticised for. He's desperate, isn't he, trying to show the image of strength and defiance, and yet you watch those pictures carefully. We had a doctor look at it this morning. He's struggling to breathe, Eric, isn't he? How's that going down with the American people?
Yeah, it was a pretty surprising scene. In fact, it made me actually clutch my chest while watching him, where it seemed like he was really struggling to catch his breath. And you wondered why the president would even put himself in that position to grapple with the virus so publicly when he could have just simply went inside. But again, this is a president who seeks to not only exude and showcase strength, but also this is a president who recognizes where he stands right now with less than 30 days to go until the election. And more than anything, the president right now wants the American people to see, or at least to showcase that he himself is actually doing well and that he can lead them through this pandemic, through this crisis.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the election, Eric, because if you look at the polls, they're telling you that quite a few Americans are not happy with the attitude to coronavirus from President Trump, saying he didn't take it seriously enough, and that is now why he has it. Do you think that will affect the election?
Yes, in fact, many people have been asking this question since it was announced that the president had contracted the virus. Will this change the electorate somehow by giving President Trump the sympathy vote? And we see just from the recent polling data that it hasn't worked in the president's favor in the way that some might think that it would. What we're seeing right now is Joe Biden is actually expanding his lead nationally over the president and also putting more of these key battleground states in play for the Democrats. And this is going to be a very tough climb for the president with 30 days to go. And he's still in quarantine, and he is still within that 7-day period where this could be a touch and go situation for the president. Very different from how we saw Boris Johnson actually deal with this virus being in the intensive care unit. It was something that was just very different. And this is no different than what we've seen from previous presidents who sought to hide their debilitations and their infirmities.
Eric, always good to talk to you. Thank you. Go and get some sleep.
Mm-hmm.
You bet. Thank you.
Britain cannot continue to borrow enormous amounts of money in the long...
Hello, good morning. You're watching Breakfast this morning with Louise and Dan.
A technical glitch which led to nearly 16,000 COVID-19 cases.
Hi, good morning. President Trump has made a theatrical return to the White House to continue his treatment for coronavirus after that 3-night hospital stay. Mr. Trump, who is still contagious, removed his mask on the balcony of the White House while posing for pictures. The president told Americans he felt really good and said in a tweet, "Don't be afraid of COVID. Don't let it dominate your life." Lebu Diseko has more.
A made-for-TV homecoming for President Trump after 3 days in hospital. The message, Trump has triumphed, as he greeted the waiting press. Shortly afterwards, he posted this video on Twitter.
I learned so much about coronavirus, and one thing that's for certain, don't let it dominate you. Don't be afraid of it. You're going to beat it. We have the best medical equipment, we have the best medicines, all developed recently, and you're going to beat it. I didn't feel so good, and 2 days ago, I could have left 2 days ago. 2 days ago, I felt great, like better than I have in a long time. I said just recently, better than 20 years ago. I stood out front, I led. Nobody that's a leader would not do what I did, and I know there's a risk, there's a danger, but that's okay.
The White House says they're taking every precaution to keep the president and his staff safe. They're limiting access to him and say appropriate PPE will be worn when staff are near him. And unlike ordinary Americans, he'll have round-the-clock medical care.
Though he may not entirely be out of the woods yet, the team and I agree that all our evaluations, and most importantly, his clinical status, support the president's safe return home.
And an exit, and he'll be keen to get back onto the campaign trail. But there are still many unanswered questions about the status of his health and the more than a dozen members of his close circle that have been diagnosed with COVID-19. Lebu Diseko, BBC News, Washington.
Mr. Trump's Democratic Party rival, Joe Biden, has been on the campaign trail in Florida. Speaking at a town hall event in Miami, he attacked the president for downplaying the wearing of masks. These pictures are from NBC News.
Anybody things they've learned and know, and look, I view wearing this mask not so much protecting me, but as a patriotic responsibility. And all the tough guys say, I'm not wearing a mask, I'm not afraid. Well, be afraid for your husband, your wife, your son, your daughter, your neighbor, your co-worker. That's who you're protecting having this mask on. And it should be viewed as a patriotic duty to protect those around you.
Some observers are saying there are still unanswered questions about the timeline of the president's illness. Our North America correspondent Peter Bowes has more.
I think for a lot of people it just doesn't add up. This is a president who was taken to hospital he was diagnosed 4 days ago, who's only there for 3 days and presumably is still infectious and is now back at home at the White House, heading up onto a balcony, removing his mask and then it seems not putting his mask back on even as he entered the White House. The message that sends to the American people is what is angering so many, that it is a reckless message, that it's irresponsible, to suggest that in some way the bravado that goes with it is appropriate for the president at this time when 210,000 Americans have died from COVID-19 and the number of cases, those spikes in infection are occurring all around the country.
The Prime Minister will close the Conservatives' virtual party conference later today.
Though they're still significantly lower than those of France, Spain, Britain.
There's obviously a strong chance that things might get out of control. I think it is really down to how effectively the public health institutions can track cases and stamp out cases. So far, they've been doing a pretty good job.
The risk of being infected significantly for everyone in the classroom, then it's great. There's no 100% certainty.
There's lots of debate. Should masks be worn in outdoor spaces? Should alcohol sales be banned at night? But all agree on this. Germany simply cannot afford a second lockdown.
Continue his treatment for coronavirus there after that 3-night stay in hospital. Mr. Trump is still contagious. He removed his mask on the balcony of the White House while posing for pictures and has faced criticism for that. There are also questions about the timeline of his illness. Let's talk now to Dr. Matt Morgan, an intensive care unit consultant. Hello to you, Dr. Morgan. From the drugs that we've been told President Trump has been treated with, what have you learned about how serious his illness is?
Well, many of the drugs that he's been given, especially dexamethasone, which is one of the main ones, a steroid drug, is a drug which has good evidence behind it, but only for those patients who are receiving oxygen or for patients who are critically ill. So certainly here in the UK, if people are in hospital on oxygen or where I work in the intensive care unit, they will be given those drugs. But what we don't know is whether that drug is helpful in people who are less ill than that.
Right. And does it change your mood?
So dexamethasone is a drug that's been around since the 50s. It was actually discovered by an American scientist, the same person who described steroids as discovered napalm, actually, which perhaps President Trump would be interested in knowing. And it's got a range of side effects, some which are common, some which are less common. Mood disturbances is one of those, as well as increased appetite. Blood sugars can change, and it can also give you some stomach problems, some stomach ulcers, for example.
Right. What about antibodies? How will they help him?
Well, he's allegedly been given some drugs, and I'm not President Trump's doctor, which I'm pleased to say, but in the public domain, it's discussed this new antibody cocktail called Regeneron, which is a mixture of human man-made antibodies against the COVID virus. Now, that hasn't got strong evidence behind it, but there's a group in the UK who run the recovery study on dexamethasone, a group from the University of Oxford, who's now including that drug in one of the biggest COVID trials in the world that we are running in over 170 sites here in the UK. So we'll know more about that drug, hopefully, when that study is completed.
The fact that he was given oxygen twice, we're told, what does that tell you about the seriousness of his illness?
Well, we forget that oxygen is also a drug. Discovered by Joseph Priestley back in the late 1700s, an English chemist, so President Trump has us to thank for that. But that too is probably the most powerful drug we use in hospital. We know that the most common effects of COVID when people are ill are on the lungs, and they often need oxygen. So it certainly puts it in that category where we would think about using drugs like dexamethasone, like another drug he's had called remdesivir.
When he tweeted he was feeling really good and do not be afraid of COVID, what did you think as an intensive care consultant?
Well, fear is never a good way to go in the world. We have to have hope. That's why I go to work in intensive care. That's why the 200 nursing staff, cleaners, cooks go to hospital, is to give people hope, even when they are critically ill. and fear isn't a helpful emotion for that. But there are other emotions which are helpful, such as responsibility. And what we know, the best way to get over this virus isn't with expensive drugs, isn't where I work in intensive care. It's with simple things. It's by not getting it in the first place. And that's not just for individuals, that's for the people around them. So wash your hands, keep that social distance, wear a mask. They're incredibly simple, cheap things and effective things to do, which are far better than any drugs.
And he is, of course, at the centre of a COVID outbreak in the White House, and he's returned there and is still infectious. So what should he be doing in terms of isolating?
Well, I'm not a public health doctor. My expertise are when people are critically ill. But what we do know is that this is an incredibly infectious virus, especially indoors. So, you know, the key messages that we all know about, we've heard repeatedly and are true and work and help are to isolate yourself from others when you're infectious, when you have symptoms, wash your hands and wear a mask indoors. You know, those are incredibly simple, cheap, powerful interventions which work, and really importantly, it's there to help other people as well as just yourself.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate you giving us some time this morning, especially when you're so busy, I'm sure. Dr. Matt Morgan, intensive care unit consultant, talking to us from Cardiff. How sensible was he? Right, 9:30, it's time for a look at the weather. Here's Carol.
Download the BBC News app now and get the latest headlines as they happen.
Hello, this is BBC News. Here are the headlines this morning. President as he returns to the White House from hospital.
Don't let it dominate you. Don't be afraid of it.
Boris Johnson says he wants every home in the UK to be powered by electricity from offshore wind farms. We've been told that a difficult time lies ahead as the number of cases continues to rise across the country. Let's bring you the sport now, and here is Kat at the Hi, it's Tuesday. Good morning. I'm Victoria Derbyshire. Here are the headlines. As he returns to the White House from hospital.
Don't let it dominate you. Don't be afraid of it.
Way this year. Send me an email, victoria@bbc.co.uk, or message me on Instagram or Twitter @VicDerbyshire.
No one's perfect.
Well, she was. Unless, of course, you want to tell me something I don't know.
To me, it seems like you want your life.
That's not what
I know what I'm saying.